I sensed trouble the moment Damien Cross stepped onto the operations floor with a smile that looked manufactured and eyes that evaluated the room the way a buyer examines discounted merchandise. His handshake never reached me. Instead, he offered a dismissive wave as if I were the receptionist and not the person who had shaped the very structure of the organization he now intended to lead. The transition brief I held for him remained unread in my hands. He moved on, greeting others with a polished performance that had clearly been rehearsed for years. My name is Alana Pierce. When the organization was nothing more than 4 desks squeezed into a shared workspace, I was hired to bring order to chaos. I wrote grant proposals, created the first policies, codified early decisions, and organized the engineers' rambling notes into language a reviewer could understand. Many people privately confess that I kept the building upright, though they said it the way one mentions a fire extinguisher. Necessary, but rarely appreciated. My contributions appeared in early documentation because legal insisted it was safer. They said my authorship would reduce the chance of disputes. I accepted it quietly. Recognition was irrelevant if the structure functioned. I wanted stability, not applause. Years passed. The organization grew. Rumors of a lucrative government partnership swept through the building. The contract was large enough to transform our community initiative into a national force. Suddenly, everyone adjusted their posture and polished their smiles. The slightest task became a performance for imagined observers. I continued my work without decoration. I had witnessed enough rising and falling ventures to know excitement rarely equals success. Everything shifted when Damien arrived. He enjoyed delivering phrases like operational purification and structural streamlining. He walked with the cadence of a podium speaker who never turned down a microphone. Within a week, my access to dashboards evaporated. My email lists vanished. Meetings that required my input proceeded without a single request for context. Then a new title appeared in the system without warning: Administrative Support Coordinator. A polite way of saying I had been moved aside. They relocated me to a small desk near the mail carts, where the sound of packages thudding against metal racks became the rhythm of my day. A single sticky note with my initials marked my space because no one bothered to order a nameplate. People who once relied on me now avoided my gaze. They passed quickly, guilty and silent. They replaced me with a young analyst named Brielle. She was kind, optimistic, and thoroughly unprepared for the labyrinth she inherited. Nevertheless, I trained her carefully. I taught her the dependencies in policy documents, the order of operations in compliance logs, and the small details that prevented catastrophic errors. She listened intently but struggled to understand the depth behind every decision. "This is more complicated than I thought," she said once. "It usually is," I replied. As the office scrambled to appear competent for the government partnership, mistakes accumulated. Minor errors multiplied. Small inconsistencies stacked themselves into precarious columns, and the foundation I had built groaned under the weight of unfamiliar hands. No one asked for help. They preferred the illusion of independence. Through all of this, I remained quiet. There is strength in stillness. When someone believes you do not matter, they speak freely around you. They discuss plans, concerns, and secrets openly. They forget you can hear. I printed important drafts. I saved early versions of frameworks. I stored meeting notes that others believed lost. Not out of bitterness, out of a sense of duty. Structures fail when history disappears. Then a federal review team entered the picture. Their presence started as whispers. Someone in compliance heard their questions. Someone in legal heard their requests. Within days, a liaison contacted me directly. They had discovered a framework listing me as a primary contributor. They asked for verification. I sent them the original documents. Hours later, a second message arrived from a supervisor. They had identified additional systems displaying my authorship. They wanted to know why my title did not match my contributions. They asked if this discrepancy was intentional. That question was not mine to answer. The atmosphere in the building shifted. Damien walked with a tense jaw and hurried steps. Compliance staff glanced at me with unfamiliar intensity. Conversations quieted when I approached. The federal team had begun unwinding years of neglect. The next day, Brielle approached me with a policy draft in her shaking hands. She did not understand a clause fundamental to the organization's major framework. When I explained it to her, her expression softened into something like awe. "You wrote this," she whispered. "Yes," I said. The truth was beginning to surface, and no one was prepared for what it would reveal. The morning after Brielle discovered the truth in the framework draft, a human resources coordinator appeared beside my desk with a strained smile. She informed me that Damien wanted to see me immediately. Her stiff posture told me everything. They had reached the stage where denial could no longer protect them. They led me to a small conference room that smelled faintly of dust and burnt coffee. Inside sat Damien, two legal representatives, and Brielle, who kept her eyes on the table. They did not offer me a seat, so I pulled out a chair and sat. Damien began speaking with a tense grin that barely concealed desperation. He claimed the federal review team had flagged a small clerical mismatch. He pushed a packet toward me and explained that the organization planned to file a clarification stating that I had only provided administrative support on certain documents. He spoke as if expecting immediate agreement. I reached into my bag and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. The original signed draft. 3 signatures. One from the Director of Ethics. One from Elijah Marks, the engineer I had worked with for weeks. And one from me, clearly labeled co-author. Silence filled the room like rising smoke. Legal examined the document. They checked dates, signatures, and markings. One of the representatives finally spoke. "This is binding." The words dropped like weight. Damien tried to recover with excuses about outdated formats and loose contributor language. Legal interrupted him again, voice steady and cold. "The federal review team has paused their assessment until authorship is verified. We need every original draft." I simply said, "I have everything you need." That was when the atmosphere in the building shifted permanently. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. People sent emails to the wrong lists and accidentally copied me on discussions about intellectual ownership. The compliance director whispered heatedly in hallways. Leaders debated the definition of contribution. Panic spread like a quiet contagion. That evening, I carried neatly labeled folders to legal. They pored over every page, revision histories, handwritten notes, email exchanges where engineers requested clarification from me. Legal realized the organization had built its most valuable systems with my hands, my insight, and my language. The next morning, I discovered a sealed envelope on my desk. The federal liaison wanted to schedule a comprehensive interview. They had connected 22 documents to my name and suspected even more. By midday, Damien called an emergency leadership meeting. I was not invited, but I heard the tension through the walls. Voices rose. Someone mentioned ownership risk. Someone else mentioned valuation instability. The organization had stumbled into a legal battlefield with no map. After the meeting, Damien approached me with carefully measured politeness. He suggested we collaborate on a unified narrative. He praised my early work. He claimed the confusion was not his fault. He spoke as if flattery could erase years of erasure. I answered calmly, "You attempted to remove my authorship from the record." He froze, then walked away without a word. Later that afternoon, legal conducted the first of several interviews with me. They asked about every document. I explained each decision, showed each revision, and detailed every collaborative exchange. Their expressions shifted gradually from concern to understanding. My work was not incidental. It was foundational. Days passed. The federal liaison held a formal recorded review with me. I provided full documentation. I explained every structural component. When the review ended, the liaison thanked me with sincere respect. The federal team escalated their involvement. They requested updated organizational charts, ownership records, and evidence of proper agreements. Leadership scrambled to respond. Then I received a meeting invitation from the founder himself. He had not spoken to me directly in nearly a year. When I entered the boardroom, he offered me the good chair. His face held tension and regret. He apologized for miscommunication and oversight. I listened silently. Legal presented a binder. Inside, the federal assessment confirmed what leadership had refused to acknowledge. My authorship shaped major value drivers in the pending contract. The founder looked at me with a mixture of relief and dread. "We need to resolve this," he said. I asked what he proposed. "We want you to join the leadership team again, in a role that reflects your contributions." I asked, "What is the role?" "Chief Structural Policy Architect," he answered. It was not a symbolic title. It was accurate. I requested documented responsibilities, corrected authorship, and updated records. Legal agreed immediately. Hours later, an internal message announced that Damien had been placed on administrative leave. No one said his name out loud. They no longer needed to. The truth had gained momentum, and the building finally understood the force behind it. The following morning unfolded with heavy anticipation. Legal required additional verification, compliance demanded clarification, and the federal team requested more documents. Each department moved with urgency. Every step they took intersected with my work. I was relocated to a temporary office near the legal wing. For the first time in years, leadership knocked gently before entering. Their questions were direct but careful. They wanted timelines, structural explanations, and the evolution of policy systems. They needed the truth to build a defensible case. Whenever I spoke, they took notes as if each sentence carried weight. Meanwhile, Damien remained absent. No one spoke openly about him, but uncertainty hung in the air. Some feared disciplinary consequences for having supported his decisions. Others feared their own roles might be questioned. The quiet around his name spoke louder than any explanation. Later that afternoon, legal held a joint session with compliance. They reviewed every page connected to early structural development. At first, they tried to move quickly. Then the scope became clear. Every document told a story they had never acknowledged. My handwriting appeared in margins. My signatures sat above foundational clauses. My language filled core frameworks. When the session ended, the compliance director whispered, "We should have known." No one challenged him. After reviewing the documents, the federal team submitted a final request. They wanted a high-level meeting with me, the founder, and a representative from the buyer. The contract could not proceed without an accurate authorship record. We scheduled it for 9 in the morning. When I entered the boardroom, the atmosphere was heavy but resolute. The founder sat at the head of the table. Legal arranged binders neatly in front of us. The federal representatives waited with papers aligned precisely. At the far end sat the buyer representative, a woman whose calm expression suggested she had navigated corporate storms before. She greeted me respectfully. The federal team began by summarizing their findings. They identified every system I had developed, refined, or authored. They detailed how my contributions shaped the framework central to the organization's value. They highlighted the absence of proper agreements and the inconsistencies between my actual work and my assigned title. Then they turned to me. "Ms. Pierce," they asked, "do you confirm the contributions outlined in these documents?" I answered truthfully, "Yes. I created them, reviewed them, and structured them. Everything in those documents reflects my work." The buyer representative nodded slowly. "Your clarity is appreciated. Our partnership depends on stability." That stability requires accurate attribution and leadership alignment. She turned to the founder. We will not proceed without corrected records and a leadership structure that reflects actual contributors. The founder agreed without hesitation. After the meeting, legal presented me with the updated organizational chart. My new role carried full authority over structural policy, authorship rights, and oversight. It included compensation adjustments for years of misalignment. My name finally sat where it had always belonged. Later that day, an internal announcement circulated across the organization. It stated that I had accepted a senior leadership role and would oversee all structural frameworks moving forward. It did not mention the failures that led to this moment. It simply acknowledged the truth. The silence in the office changed. No longer cold, no longer dismissive. It carried recognition. As I gathered a few items from my temporary office, Brielle approached me with hesitant steps. She thanked me for my guidance and said she now understood how deeply my work shaped the organization. I nodded gently. When I stepped outside, the evening air felt open and honest. The weight of the past settled behind me. Truth, once revealed, did not need to shout. It only needed to stand. In the days following the high-level meeting, the entire building moved with renewed purpose. Legal continued reviewing documents for accuracy. Compliance rebuilt its processes with greater transparency, and the federal team worked toward finalizing its assessment. The organization had been forced into honesty, and the effects were visible everywhere. Departments that once moved in silos now communicated openly. Engineers approached me with questions about framework integrity. Policy analysts asked about historical reasoning behind complex clauses. The atmosphere carried a seriousness that had been missing for years. The founder visited me frequently, seeking clarity on organizational trends and gaps that had been ignored. His approach lacked the pride he once carried. He listened, took notes, and asked follow-up questions. He had begun to see the organization not as a structure he built, but as a structure built collaboratively, with me serving as one of its primary architects. Legal finalized the corrections to historical documentation. They restored authorship to every file, every framework, and every system that bore my contributions. They revised the internal narrative that had been distorted under Damien leadership. The organization became more transparent by necessity, not by choice. The buyer representative scheduled periodic check-ins to maintain alignment. Each time she requested progress reports on leadership restructuring, she monitored updates on authorship corrections. Her measured tone reflected a familiarity with organizations that hid the truth too long. I continued my work quietly, guiding structural decisions with precision. Not as a shadow, but as a recognized leader. Policy teams sought my approval for major revisions. Compliance requested oversight for new frameworks. The organization moved forward with renewed integrity. Toward the end of the assessment period, the federal review team called for a final briefing. They confirmed that authorship had been corrected, responsibilities realigned, and records updated. They commended the organization for its cooperation and noted that the contract could proceed if the buyer approved the remaining terms. The founder expressed gratitude for my patience and clarity. His voice held sincerity that had been absent for years. He recognized that the organization had survived the turmoil because the truth had finally been allowed to surface. After the briefing ended, I walked through the building slowly. Employees who once ignored me greeted me with warmth. Brielle smiled openly now, no longer intimidated by the complexity of her work. Engineers discussed revisions with confidence. Compliance followed the correct procedures with newfound respect for stability. As I stood at the main entrance ready to leave for the evening, I realized the organization had reached a new foundation. Not because of the contract, not because of new leadership titles, but because truth, once forced into daylight, reshaped the entire structure. The silence outside felt calm, not heavy. The air held clarity, and clarity, when protected long enough, becomes a source of power far greater than any title. I stepped forward knowing that the next chapter would not be defined by erasure, dismissal, or avoidance. It would be defined by accuracy, leadership, and the recognition that the quiet work that holds an organization together is often the most powerful of all. And this time, it would not be forgotten.